All right, looks like we're live. Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. William Thomas. I'm with Designing Leaders in Singapore, and I'm very happy that you are all able to join the session today. Our webinar today is scheduled for about 45 minutes. I've got 30 to 35 minutes of content, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers. You can send me questions in the chat box over there on the right-hand side of your screen. It should be on the right-hand side of your screen. But you can send me questions in the chat box, either publicly or just directly to me. And I may take some of those questions as we go along. Others I may save for the end. We'll just see how we're going. I'm also going to have some questions for you as we go along today. So I'd like to get some ideas from you as we go through the material. So our subject today is all about improving communication. And in a webinar that we did last month, we took a poll, and one of the biggest performance problems that people reported was the poor communication that they experience in the workplace. What we found is that too many people are just afraid to speak up. And that's true whether it's talking to their manager or talking to their peers or even talking with their clients. Now, I've been working with clients of my own on this issue for a few years now, and there's a workshop last year that really stands out in my mind. So I was doing a workshop in Manila with a group of managers from an airline, and I had done quite a few seminars with this airline before, and I really enjoyed working with them. They're a lot of fun, they're very open to learning, and we got along very well. But one day in one of these workshops, I found that very few people were actually offering ideas or answering questions. And the room really got pretty quiet. And on a break, one of the participants was talking with me, and she said, "Don't take it personally. We're Filipino. We don't like to speak up in a crowd." And I thought that was really an interesting thing to say. So, I've spent about 9 years now working in Asia as a professor, as a consultant, as a leadership coach. And I've come to recognize the diversity of cultures across the region. And there are a lot of cultural factors that may reduce people's willingness to speak up or to be open and transparent when they are talking. Now, that can be fine in a social setting, but it can lead to problems when you enter the professional world. So in that workshop, what I pointed out to them was that their airline doesn't just compete against other Filipinos who might also hesitate to speak up. They're competing against Lufthansa, they're competing against United Airlines and British Airways and Etihad and plenty of other airlines where the employees are not afraid to communicate. And then it's easier for those other airlines to do things more efficiently and continue to innovate and develop strong customer relationships. The point here is that the expectations that you grew up with, the expectations that guided how you communicate with each other in a family or in a social setting, those may not be appropriate in a professional setting. When people come to work for you, making the changes that they need to make to meet the needs of the workplace, that's not something that happens automatically. And it's up to the organizational leadership, and I'm talking from the CEO down to the most junior supervisor. It's up to the leadership to help people understand the expectations that are right for your workplace. You can't afford to have people hesitating to share information or hesitating to suggest new ideas. As things change, and let's face it, things always change, people need to discuss and they need to explore those changes, and they need to challenge the ideas that no longer work. You also need to be careful about your relationships with your clients. New competitors are entering your market all the time. And the way to keep your customers is by showing them that you can provide better service. And in order to provide that great service, your client-facing employees really need to be open and transparent with their customers. So today we're going to focus on creating a culture where people are comfortable communicating more openly with each other. And with that in mind, here's what I want you to take away from today's session. First, I want you to be able to define the business value that open communication can create for your organization. If you understand where you can get the value of people communicating, then you can figure out what to do to actually get that value. Next, we want to understand why communicating seems to be so difficult. And if we understand what those reasons are, then we can find ways to get around those obstacles and improve our working environment. But first, we need to know why we have the problem in the first place. Most of our time is going to be on that final point. It's going to be spent on some ways to help people change their expectations about communicating in the workplace. One reason that people hesitate to communicate is because we do not create a culture where that's normal. We want to change that. We want to purposefully create a culture so that people have the expectation that they should be sharing ideas, they should be sharing information, because that's the way work gets done here. We're going to be looking at 3 relationships in particular. We're going to be looking at employees' openness with their managers, with their peers, and with clients. Now, all of these are important to business performance, and all of them can be challenging. Now, before I dive into this, let me ask you a question. Of these 3 relationships, which one gives you the biggest problem when it comes to communication? I'm curious to hear from you where you see the biggest problems in your organization. Is it getting your employees to talk to their bosses, to talk to people senior to them? Is it getting employees to open up to each other? Is it getting your employees to talk openly and honestly with your clients? Or is everything fine? Is everything perfect? Probably not going to see too many responses there, but let me get a sense from you of where your biggest problems are. And it looks like with the results coming in, a little bit of a mix. Okay, there is a dominant one here, which is not surprising. So, all right, getting a few more answers in here. Okay, great. All right, let me go ahead and close this. And as you can see, most of the problem that you've identified is between the employee and the manager, and that's not a big surprise. That's a pretty common challenge, and not just in Asia, by the way. Even though most of you are coming in from Asia, that's kind of a human problem. It's not just an Asian problem. Okay, but we also do see some folks with some challenges in peer-to-peer communication, and also in speaking with the client. And there's at least one person who said everything's fine. So good for you, and hopefully you've got some ideas that you can share with us today. So let's start by talking just a little bit then about why this matters. And first of all, I would say that improved communication really reduces uncertainty, which is very, very valuable. And we talked about this in a webinar last month. Uncertainty tends to slow down the work because people are really unsure about what they should be doing. But when people are more comfortable asking for clarification, or when they're more comfortable sharing information, you'll find that uncertainty tends to fade away. Secondly, open communication helps you be innovative, and maybe innovation is important to your business. If so, you want everybody feeling comfortable contributing new ideas and sharing their ideas. Not just the senior people, not just people in a specific role, but everybody. And when you do that, and when people know they can contribute, then you're liable to get useful ideas from unexpected places. Next, communication also improves employee engagement. There have been a lot of studies of engagement here in Asia, and the numbers may be different in every study, but the results are pretty similar in that they are consistently low. When employees feel like they're welcome to speak up, though, and we're like they can offer ideas, when they can ask questions, when they can give feedback, engagement tends to go up because they feel like more a part of a group rather than an individual in a room full of people. So if you feel like engagement levels are low in your company, then by improving communication and thus improving engagement levels, you can improve performance because people are going to contribute more discretionary effort, and they'll feel like they're more connected to everybody else, and they tend to contribute more to everybody else. And then the last point down there is about improving your relationships with your customers by communicating effectively with them. and being open and being honest. All too often, we tell customers what we think they want to hear rather than being realistic with them. We say, sure, we can do that, and then we go back to the office and try to figure out how to do that. And oftentimes that comes back to hurt us, especially if we cannot deliver on what we promised. Building a sustainable relationship with your customers is important if you want to avoid losing them as new competitors are coming up. So with those benefits in mind, let's look at some of the common obstacles that tend to limit communication in the workplace, and in particular here in Asia. There are a lot of social factors that tend to affect our willingness to communicate. Young people are taught to show great respect for their elders. And as an elder myself, I think that's great. But it also means that they're less likely to disagree or correct somebody who's senior to them. People often try to avoid conflict with others or avoid causing others to lose face. That can lead them to ignore a problem and not correct something, not correct somebody else. It can keep them from offering a new idea that may contradict the boss's idea. People tend to keep things to themselves. Also, in some cultures, it's considered very rude to stand out. And so people may hesitate to offer their ideas or their opinions because they don't want to stand out in the crowd. Now, I'm not criticizing any of these social characteristics, nor am I saying that they should change. They all exist for good reasons. What I am saying, though, is that they have an impact on how your employees work. So we should consider that impact and then find ways to overcome any problems that they create for us. I should add, and one of the comments here from Jay Travis suggesting that trust is also a bit of an issue. This is an interesting challenge, and it's something I actually studied in graduate school. The concept of social trust changes from society to society. And very often, if you grow up concerned about the response you're going to get from senior people and being almost afraid of senior people, that may lead to a reduction in trust. You also find that if senior people are not open in their own communication with the juniors, that can also hurt trust. So again, another social factor there is the trust level in a society. There are some other things, though, that can also have an impact. Consider what it's like to be a student. Students may feel like they're supposed to just accept whatever the teacher says, and so they never get into the habit of challenging senior people or challenging their peers. There may also be a focus on memorization or doing that rather than actually analyzing an issue, and that encourages people to just accept somebody else's ideas rather than questioning those ideas. You just accept what you're told and memorize it rather than actually thinking about it and questioning it. Teachers will often emphasize individual work rather than collaboration, and this teaches people not to share information, but instead to focus on using what they know for themselves. And this is especially true if teachers are grading on a curve and you feel like you're in competition with everybody else in the classroom. Finally, consider how work has traditionally gotten done in the past. There's been a lot of reliance on a strict hierarchy, with a person at the top saying, "This is how it is," and everybody below them just nodding in agreement. It's also very common in many companies for each function or business unit to operate on its own without a lot of communication between people. Finally, when it comes to sales and other client-facing roles, there's often been a focus on what we call leading with yes. In other words, when a customer asks for something, you tell them yes, and then you figure out how to do it. I used to work for a company that strongly emphasized that attitude, and when you have that as the basis for your sales philosophy, it makes a lot of people nervous about telling a customer no, even if that's the correct answer. Now, in many companies throughout Asia, these factors are starting to change. But even when a company's leadership says, "We want to work differently," employees have long memories, and it's hard to change their habits. So these traditional business structures still have an impact, even in companies that are trying to change. Now, people have expectations based on their past experiences, and if we do nothing to change those expectations, then they are going to affect how people work. When your employees come to you, they come with a certain set of life experiences that have led them to have certain expectations about how they're supposed to act. And you can't just expect them to act differently simply because you want them to. Now, I saw this happen last year with a client in Vietnam. This was a manufacturing company, and they were going through a lot of sudden growth and dramatic changes. The leaders with whom I was working really wanted ideas and feedback from their people, even their frontline factory employees, but they were not getting a response. They told me that their employees' attitude seemed to be, hey, you're the boss, so you figure it out. Either they were afraid to offer ideas because they didn't think they were supposed to, or they were expecting the boss to do all the thinking because, hey, that's why they're the boss. So when people come to you with expectations that do not match your needs, you need to reset those expectations. You cannot erase people's memories or past experiences, but you can help them set new expectations for going forward. When it comes to communication, you need to help people understand what kind of communication is necessary for the business, and then create a culture where they feel comfortable speaking up, even if that goes against their previous experiences. Now, having said that, and we're going to look specifically at how to create that kind of a culture, but realize that the techniques we talk about are some basic ideas that you may need to change for your particular situation. As Antonio mentioned here in the comment section in the chat box, one problem you may have with communication is that you may have multiple managers. And so an employee has two different people asking for two different things, and both those managers think their priority is the top priority. That's a situation you need to be able to work around. So take these ideas that we're going to talk about today, but adapt them to your particular situation. Don't just try to take something off of a slide and cut and paste it into your organization, but put it to use in a way that's helpful for you. So let's first talk about resetting expectations in the employee to manager relationship. Looking down the left side, these are expectations that a lot of people have. These are a lot of common cultural factors. And as you can see on the left at the top, your employees may be afraid to challenge senior people. Where you want to go is to those areas on the right, to the text in white. So you want to transition them to where they perhaps focus on challenging ideas rather than on challenging people. You make the conversation less personal. It's not a personal attack on you. It's simply a challenge of this idea that you've presented. Employees may be worried about making their leaders look bad. You know, you don't want to lead people to lose face, and so you keep ideas to yourselves. It would help then if leaders would acknowledge that they are not perfect and show not only that they are open to new ways of doing things, but they are actively looking for those ways, and maybe even share some of their own mistakes and share some of their own failures in the past to show that, hey, I'm human too. Do that to help change the nature of that relationship. Down there on the bottom left, your employees may be unsure about their place in the organization. I had somebody once say to me, I feel like my job is to sit against the wall in meetings for 20 years until it's my turn to talk. When people feel like it is not their place to talk, they need to know that you do want to hear from them. So you should find ways to highlight the need for everybody's participation, create some processes, create some practices. They don't have to be formal policies, but just the way you work and the way you communicate with others should indicate that participation is really what you're interested in. Now, these are nice ideas. These are somewhat general. How do you turn these, how do you put these into practice? I want to suggest some specific techniques for you. And like I said, you can adapt these to your own situation. And as we're going along, if you have some ideas that have worked for you, I hope that you'll share them in the chat box so that everybody can benefit. So first of all, consider this. Consider how you might set some KPIs, how you might set some performance metrics for proposing new ideas. You might, for example, give your employees a specific number of new proposals that they should make over the course of a year, or a specific number of new proposals, a minimum number that they should present every quarter. This tells them that you're serious about this. You're not just saying, oh, we want to hear from everybody. You're actually making it part of their job. And rather than having them wonder if they should be suggesting ideas, they know that it's something they're actually required to do. If you feel like people are uncomfortable pitching their ideas to you or proposing ideas in front of a group, consider creating an anonymous system. I mean, this goes back to the days of the suggestion box hanging on the wall in the pantry. but there are plenty of digital solutions available for anonymous idea proposals and anonymous suggestions. So look for something anonymous if you think people don't want to speak up publicly. Here's a simple one. This is a very simple one, and I've used this myself throughout my career, and I find this to be so valuable. When you're in a meeting and you're asking for inputs, start with the junior person in the room and then work your way up to the most senior. That way, your junior employees don't worry that they're going to disagree with their seniors because the seniors haven't said anything yet. Finally, let people know how you prefer to get information. Do you want a quick 30-second pitch, or do you need an entire PowerPoint deck? When people know how you absorb information, then giving you that information becomes a lot easier. And when it's easier, they're more likely to do it. Let me give an example of an informal process here that gets to this last point. Something that helps an employee feel more comfortable speaking up because they know what the rules are, they know what the expectations are. And this actually comes from my own career. Now, I spent 21 years as an officer in the United States Air Force, and at the start of my Air Force career, I was working with nuclear missiles. And my first commander in that squadron used a technique that I used later when I was a commander, and frankly, I still find this technique useful today, and it's what I call the 2 objection policy. It works like this. As a team commander, I'm responsible for making decisions. But I had a deputy commander who was supposed to stop me if I was going down the wrong path. It's almost like the captain of a ship and the first officer. So whenever I was assigned a new deputy commander, I would tell them the same thing that my first commander said to me. I would say this to them: if I give you an order and you think I'm making a mistake, it is your job to interrupt me and very quickly convince me that I'm wrong. If I continue to go forward with my own idea and you're really sure that I'm wrong, you have one more chance to convince me. If you can't, then we go with my decision because we're out of time and we need to go forward. The advantage of this policy was that the people working for me knew that I would listen to their inputs, but they also knew that there was a point where we would stop and I would make a decision and then they would follow my orders. They knew the rules of the game. They didn't have to wonder, should I speak up or not? They knew that they were expected to, and they also knew when not to. Now, obviously, your working situation is a little bit different. Most of you probably aren't working with nuclear weapons. So if you wanted to use this idea, you might adjust it, of course, to your particular situation. But the point here is just to make the rules clear and create the rules such that people know when they should be speaking up. So how about helping your employees communicate with coworkers and with other peers? And some of you indicated that that is an issue for you. And Barry said that here in the comment section, that there's some peer-to-peer communications, even though employee to manager is the big one, there's still some peer-to-peer problems. And a lot of companies experience this. As you'll see up here on the left-hand side at the top, very often people are afraid to share information with a competitor. If they feel like they're competing for promotions, for pay raises, for other opportunities, they may not want to share that information. Your goal should be to create a greater sense of cooperation and collaboration rather than competition. Secondly, people may hesitate to provide peer feedback. They may think that no one else wants advice from them. You can create an environment where people are open to receiving feedback, which will then make them more comfortable giving feedback. If everybody accepts feedback from their peers, then it becomes a lot easier to give that feedback as well, and that discomfort tends to fade away. One of the reasons people may hesitate to share information, or at least maybe they don't hesitate, maybe it just doesn't occur to them, is because they don't know what other people need. They don't know what other people do and what information would be helpful. So to overcome this, you can help people develop a better understanding of each other's roles, so they know when they can step in and when their own particular knowledge might be useful. So what can we do to help with that employee-to-employee communication? Once again, consider setting KPIs, this time for knowledge sharing, for team efforts. So set a metric for your employee around reaching out to others or networking with others or participating in cross-functional projects. And then get inputs from others about how much your employee is actually reaching out to support them and providing information. If people know that they're being evaluated on how helpful they are or on how forthcoming they are with information, then they're more likely to actually follow through and do it. Okay, when you evaluate people for something, they know that you're serious. Next, recognize employees who support others or who coach others or who provide feedback to others. This could come from you. That recognition could be from you, or it could be from their peers. It doesn't have to be a financial reward. We're not talking about bonuses here, though it could be a gift card for a coffee shop, sure. But honestly, just a pat on the back can mean a lot. One company with whom I used to work created their own app to do this, and they would put it on their sales team's iPads so that even when they were on the road, they could easily send a thank you to somebody in the company who helped them out, and there was a record of it. When you make it easy to recognize people, then employees are going to be more likely to do it. And when they recognize each other for that support, it reinforces the importance that communication plays. Consider holding lunchtime talks or brown bag sessions or lunch and learns, whatever you call them, where employees share something. Maybe it's about their work, maybe it's about lessons they've learned, maybe it's about personal life experiences. Like, have people give a presentation, have them give a talk, deliver a talk at lunch. Once you get people to start talking, they're usually going to keep talking. So if you get them sharing with a group, maybe about something informal, then soon they'll be sharing more one-on-one about your business-related topics. And finally, if you want people to coach each other and offer feedback, don't just wait for that to happen. Consider assigning peer coaches, and this is where you can get double the value, I guess, is consider matching people up from different functions or different teams. So maybe they don't feel like they're giving advice to a competitor. And Barry has left a comment here. He says that one of the challenges with peer-to-peer feedback is that it's viewed as a personal challenge rather than an effort to improve the product or the service. Well, there is a way that you can make this a little bit less personal. And let me share with you an example from a consulting company that was here in Singapore, actually. And this was a global firm that had offices in about a dozen different cities. And when a new employee joined, they would be assigned a peer coach. And the peer coach did a couple of things. They would help the new person with some of their soft skills, like communication and email writing and things of that nature. But they would also help them navigate the internal processes and policies in the company. Now, what was unique about this was that the coach was somebody from another office. So a new consultant at the Singapore office would have a coach from Sydney or Delhi rather than somebody sitting next to them. And there were some very specific advantages to this. First of all, by cooperating with people in other offices, it reinforced the idea that we don't compete with the other offices. Instead, we're all competing with all the other consulting firms that are out there. Okay, the competitors are outside the company, not inside. Second, the new employee often felt more comfortable asking questions from somebody they didn't see every day, and the coach felt more comfortable giving feedback to somebody they didn't see every day. Okay, so it removed some of the personal nature and that potential for the challenge that Barry and Tony have mentioned here. Finally, it helped to share good practices across different markets. Rather than having a lot of good ideas sitting in the Sydney office, they could share those ideas throughout the company, and it helped improve innovation all around the company by encouraging the free flow of ideas. So look at ways that you can open up the lines of communication between your employees in a way that adds value, the kind of business value that you need. Now, the last relationship I want to touch on here is between your employees and their clients, and a few of you mentioned that this is a problem for you. Your employees may be very, very familiar with the products that you offer, but they might not know very much about the customer's needs, as you see there in the top left. So what you can do is try to improve their focus on diagnosing the customer's needs rather than just going to a customer and trying to sell them whatever it is you're offering. Okay, and that involves asking a lot of questions and really listening rather than just handing the customer a product list and saying, pick one. Now, our big concern, as I mentioned before, is that your employees may be afraid to say no to a customer and potentially miss a sale. Try to create the expectation. Try to get your salespeople to instead respond with no, but. In other words, try to find an alternative. If you can't do what the customer wants, try to provide an alternative rather than just saying no or saying yes and then digging a hole for yourself. If you can't do something, you need to say so, but your salespeople will be more comfortable doing that if they're ready to offer alternatives. And finally, once a sale is made, all too often communication stops and there's not a lot of follow-up. And this is a bad way to try to retain customers, okay? So refocus your client-facing people on overall engagement with the customer rather than just on the sales figures. Help them see how ongoing communication is going to improve customer retention and create more opportunities for future sales as the customer's needs evolve. So how do we put these into practice? Once again, right there at the top, again, consider using KPIs, setting metrics for your salespeople, for example, that reflect customer satisfaction, not just sales. Don't just measure salespeople's performance on the actual number of sales, but also on customer satisfaction or feedback from the customers. When your salespeople know they're going to be evaluated based on the customer satisfaction, they're more likely to engage with the customer to find the right solution and not just make the sale and walk away. Try using rewards and recognition for customer feedback. Let people know about the positive feedback that they get from customers, and recognize the individuals with high customer satisfaction scores, not just the individuals with high sales figures. Try to hold your sales teams somewhat accountable for client retention. Very often, a salesperson hands off a client to a client relations manager or a client service manager, and each of them tend to have a separate set of metrics. Try having some shared metrics in there. Create a better partnership by having your sales team be somewhat accountable for the retention of the client, not just for the sale. And finally, if you think that people are uncomfortable saying no to clients, try holding practice sessions where they rehearse saying no, but, and figuring out alternatives. The more people practice something, the more comfortable they're going to be doing it. And of course, the more they practice it, the better they'll be too, at least we hope. So looking at this last point, getting your employees to be more open with clients, let's take a look at your sales approach for that. You really want your employees to be comfortable with diagnosing, not just selling, okay? It's sort of like how a doctor should be trying to diagnose what's wrong with you, not just saying, hey, I got a bunch of these pills, why don't you take some, okay? Now that takes more time, but it does lead to better communication. So the first thing you do is you learn to ask questions. I can tell you when I was going through training, my coaching training, one of the things that was pounded into my head was that 80% of what I say should be a question, not a statement. I should spend 4 times the amount of time figuring out what's going on with my client than I spend trying to convince them of something or give them advice. So learn to be a good questioner and a good listener. Next, try not to focus too much on the bad news. Try not to worry too much about getting a no. If you're prepared to turn a no into a yes, then you don't have to avoid the no in the first place. And finally, get into the habit of following up with your customers. Have a timeline and create a process for actually following up with your customers and finding out how they're doing. Put it on your calendar. Have a reminder that pops up every 3 months or every month or every 6 months or whatever schedule you want. But have a system for actually checking in with your customers. And it becomes a lot easier to actually do it when you've got a little reminder popping up on your phone. Okay, these are easy fixes. But the bottom line of this, the bottom line of all of these techniques, not just for employee to client, but all the ones that we've shared here, is that you need to change the culture in which people are working from an environment of holding back to an environment where people are much more comfortable sharing because they know that the expectation is that they're going to share. People need to know it's okay to share information and ideas with others. That's the expectation. It's the norm. It's not something unusual. Now, culture change doesn't happen right away. Don't do these things on a Monday and think that by Friday everything's going to be fine, but they do take some time. But in order for that time to start, you've actually got to take an action. Now, in a moment, I'm going to pull up and I'm going to see what questions or what comments you have. But I I want you to be thinking about the ideas that we've talked about today. It's easy to join a session like this and then go back to your inbox and forget about everything here because you're dealing with the 17 emails that have come in since we got started. But I want to give you some action items to actually go and do once this session is over, okay? Some steps that you could take immediately. And as I'm presenting these, if you have some questions, by all means, go ahead and send them to me in the chat box. So first of all, talk with your team, talk with your employees, talk with your coworkers about communication issues. Now, you might not have this conversation later today because everybody's already got plans for today, but as soon as we get offline, as soon as we're done here, look at your calendar, look at your schedule, and schedule a meeting with your team to talk about communication, okay? Schedule the meeting today. You don't have to have it today, but at least put it on the calendar today, okay? Send out the invitations, set it up on Zoom or WebEx or whatever you do, but have that conversation. Plan to have that conversation. And set that up today. Don't put it off. When you have that conversation, evaluate how the communication problems that come up are affecting the business. What is the business impact of your communication challenges? How is it affecting revenue? How is it affecting cost? How is it affecting performance? Don't just look at the communication problems, okay? Look at how those problems are impacting you. And once you look at the actual effect those problems are having, you can prioritize your actions. You can prioritize what you need to fix first. Now, this next one, you can do on your own. You don't have to have a meeting for this. Or maybe you'll get some feedback when you talk with everybody else. I want you to find one thing you can do to improve how you share information with others. Everything else we've talked about today is about how your employees communicate with other people. But don't forget, you need to communicate openly as well. Not just to set the example, but actually to make sure that information is flowing around, okay? And this also helps get back to the trust issue that was raised earlier. People are more likely to trust you and be open with you if you are open with them. So figure out if there's something that you can do better. Now, I say that you should have a conversation with your team. Let me offer up some potential discussion questions that you might have with your team. Have we made any mistakes because we didn't communicate with each other? Don't just ask, do we have any problems? It's really easy for people to say no and then go back to work, okay? But don't just identify the problems. You know, remember, it's all about coming up with the impact, understanding the impact and understanding the effect on the business. Ask, is there any information you need but you feel like you didn't get? This is going to help you understand where the information gaps are happening, where the communication breakdown is happening, and it can help you find the specific challenges. Have we had problems with clients due to poor communication? This could help you find a communication problem between salespeople and clients. It could help you find an internal communication problem. Maybe the problem is that you have 6 different people reaching out to the same client, but you don't know that because nobody talks to each other. And finally, do you know who to reach out to if you need help with something? If the answer is no, then again, that tells you that there may be some relationship gaps that are happening that you need to step in and try to address. So we've got a few minutes left for some questions. I've got a couple questions and comments that have come in already that I'll get to. But go ahead and feel free to keep sending those in. Or if you have some responses to anyone else's questions, by all means, please do share those as well if you have some ideas. Let me just share a couple other quick details with you. After this session, you're going to get an email with a link to the replay in case you want to review this again or share it with anybody else. There's also going to be a link to a feedback survey. We take those comments very, very seriously. We make little changes each month based on the responses we get from you, and we appreciate those of you who've sent those in. I would also like to add, if you're looking for any leadership development solutions, particularly leadership coaching, but also any online seminars, for example, to keep developing your leadership pipeline, then please do visit our website, which is listed there. Or you can just reply to any of the emails you received about this session, and we'll see those and we'll get back to you. Finally, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, that would be great. Just look for William Thomas, PhD. I think I'm the only one there, and you'll find me pretty easily. So for now, let me take a look at some of the questions that we have and comments that have come up. So Antonio says, we've got 360-degree assessment programs that employees can ask peers to evaluate their work performance. Sometimes it becomes a popularity contest. And that can happen when the office is so small, like everybody knows who's evaluating them. Yeah, 360s can be really useful, but there is that problem of, like you said, the popularity contest. Let me suggest something that will take you beyond 360s. It's an idea, well, you've probably heard of crowdsourcing before. Crowdsourcing ideas for innovation. Consider crowdsourcing feedback. And I've had a client before that did this, very effectively. And what they would do was, in addition to going to the peers in the organization that people work with, they would also go to outsiders. They would go to clients. They would go to vendors. They would go to people beyond the organization or people in other markets or other offices that individual works with, and ask them for their insights as well. The typical 360 feedback program has the individual as their manager, their subordinates, and then their team members that they're connected to. Crowdsourcing goes beyond those direct connections to some of the more indirect connections, and you can get some very valuable feedback from those other people as well. So consider, if an office is too small and the 360 feedback isn't really working that well, consider taking your feedback beyond that office as well. Just there's one option that's been proven to be very useful for at least one company. Tony has a question here. Says, I try to be open to my employees by having an office hour to discuss anything they would like to talk with me, but nobody shows up. Yeah, I've been there too. Okay. It seems like they're reluctant to talk about their true feelings to managers. Edmund, you've got an idea here that says perhaps they might be more open to talking about that after working hours. That's a great idea. A lot of times companies will have these team bonding events. Maybe it's we go to lunch, we go to dinner, we go out for happy hour. And obviously, these days that's a bit challenging. If you're watching the replay of this way into the future, we are in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic right now. So there's not a lot of team building events, out there in a physical space. But that can be a very good way to have some less formal discussions. If people are talking over drinks, talking over dinner, then a lot of things come out that might not come out in the office place. I would also encourage you early on to perhaps start with the anonymous methods for people to open up. And once they see that that there is a channel to talk with you and you are really open to hearing ideas, then they may become more comfortable speaking with you directly, maybe comfortable speaking with you more openly. Another thing to do, and I was talking with one of my coaching clients about this last week actually, is rather than waiting for them to come to you, consider scheduling 30 minutes with them where they come in and talk to you. And then they don't really have a choice about coming in because they have to. You told them to. And engage them that way. Engage them with some questions and not putting them on the spot, but engage them with some open-ended questions about performance, about how they think everything is going. Don't start with direct questions like, how do you think I'm doing as a boss? Or what problems do you think we have? Start with the positives and then work into areas of improvement and see what you can do. Just ask them, what can I do to make your life better? What can I do to make your work go more easily? Rather than putting the burden on them to come in, because you're right, Tony, a lot of people are going to be very nervous about that. Perhaps put the burden on you, and say, look, I need to talk with you to understand what's going on better. I want to talk with everybody. So let me ask you some questions and see if that'll help. Carolyn talks about this as bonding over lunch is a good platform to engage with the employee. I absolutely agree with that. And that's the sort of thing, honestly, going back to my military career, and Barry is on here. Barry, I'm going to come back to that point in a moment. that you've made. Barry and I were in the Air Force together, and we had a place on base called the Officers Club, and it was, and then the sergeants had the NCO Club as well, and it was an informal place where you could get together. You could have a beer, you could have dinner, you could go for lunch, and you could talk in a much less formal environment. I mean, we still called colonels sir and ma'am, but you could speak a little more openly in that informal setting than you could in the office. So Tony, maybe that's something to consider, is have those sessions, but have them in a less formal place. Okay. Let's see. Antonio, you talked about having the online video happy hours and the afternoon tea. Totally agree with that. Again, some of the clients I've been working with have been doing that, and they found that to be very helpful. So the team lunch is a great idea online. Highly encourage that. Barry, you talk about management by walking around as a great way to gather information. And I do agree with that. Just going around, talking to your people, asking questions can be really good, and it avoids some of the formality of scheduling a 30-minute session with them. So that can be somewhat less formal as well. And one of the challenges is that in our open office environments, people may hesitate to talk openly because the person in the cubicle next to them is listening. But if you have an opportunity to at least start the conversation in that, using that management by walking around style, then perhaps you can continue that conversation in a more private setting if there's something more that they need to talk about. One last thing, and I know we're a couple minutes over time, but I've got a point here from Oliver that I want to touch on. Traditional business structures usually come with who the current leader is, how to cope with every leadership change. Wow, that is a big challenge. And again, in my military career, this is something we saw, because you always, move to a new assignment really every 2 or 3 years. So we had leadership changes all the time. One of the things that the new leader has to do is come in and, first of all, try to figure out how things have been working. So it is incumbent on the leader to figure out what's been working well and think that, maybe they shouldn't change that. But it's also very important for that new leader to come in and explain how they want work to get done. And if you have a new leader who comes in, and let's say you have a nice open communication environment, and you have a new leader who comes in and says, this is the hierarchy, and nobody talks to me except the people below me, and they implement a more closed environment, the only way you're going to change their mind is to be able to show them the business value of having a more open communication style. And again, don't challenge them directly, but simply try to show them what has worked and what impact it's had on the business. And this is where we go right back to the very first point in this discussion today, which is the business value of open communication. If you're going to request that a leader work differently, or that they set a different culture or create a different environment, you need to be able to show them why. And you need to make it clear this is not a challenge to them. It is simply a method to achieving better business results. So you need to be able to make the argument, show the connection between communication and business performance, bring the data if you can, and make the case. When you get that new leader, ask them questions about how they want to communicate. Ask them questions about what they expect, but also show them what's worked. Ideally, again, you'll be able to make the case to get them to work in the way that is best for your company. All right, as I said, I'm about 4 minutes over time. I appreciate everybody staying on. We had some great questions, some great comments here. Thank you all very much for contributing to that. Our next webinar is going to be in May. I don't know if you've noticed, those of you who've joined us, but we are doing these about every 4 weeks. You're going to receive an email about that once that is all set up. We have been getting some questions from our clients about a particular topic. We've been getting a lot of questions in the last couple of weeks, and we may turn those questions into a webinar, but I'm going to keep that a surprise for now. We're going to figure that out, and we'll follow up on that. So more information to come. I hope that you will continue to take these opportunities to continue your learning. I know that we're going through a very strange period right now, and leadership development is taking a hit because we can't do workshops, and frankly, a lot of organizations have cut back on their development spending, and I understand that. So hopefully with these sessions, you're able to continue joining in. Please share them with your friends and your colleagues, and hopefully they can join us as well. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much, and I look forward to seeing you again next month. Have a great day.